Thank you so much, Mr. Kalia, as well as Mr. Chaudhary for the nice introduction. And I must also thank the Institute of Company Secretaries for giving me this opportunity. Unfortunately, I have a little constraint of time because I have to rush to another place where 2 sessions have to be addressed by me, and it starts at 2 o'clock. So I'll try to, finish off my part of the job as quickly as possible, but I would like it to be as interactive as possible so that the issues which I am trying to place before you are not missed. You guide me to this computer. I am not able to. Yeah. Now this is how I have the session planned. I'll miss the first one because Mr. Pavan Vijay has just now spoken quite a bit of it. I just want to draw your attention to a few issues in this regard, which is the definition of the which is provided in section 204, and in fact with reference to MRP, which is the report, and that is on this page, which is the requirement to be conducted by the company secretary with regard to the secretarial audit. It says, based on, I am leaving the other aspects, just coming to this issue which is somewhat interpretative as far as the aspects are concerned. Based on verification of books, papers, minute books, forms and returns, filed and other records maintained by the company. Now here the words used are books, comma, papers, whereas books and paper or books or paper is a defined term under the section 2. And I think it's subsection 212, which is the relevant part. And the books and paper, books or paper, include the account books, vouchers, writings, documents, minutes, registers maintained on paper or in electronic form. Now therefore, you cannot have the same interpretation or same definition which is given in 212 for the purpose of your verification. So please be rest assured, as far as my interpretation goes, these books do not include the books of account. And therefore, you have to have a sort of compliance, to verify the compliance with regard to the books which are not the account books. Because account books, as I said, are covered with the definition of books and papers. And it is books, comma, papers. Legislature would not use words which do not have the meaning which have to be assigned to them in accordance with the intent. And I don't think the intent was to include the books of account, because then it would be very difficult for you to comply with the requirements. The books of account are part of the statutory order, and he will look into it as Mr. Pavan Vijay very rightly pointed out. Now therefore quickly I'll leave the other aspects, although they are given in my compilation, and I'll come to slide 9. Now this is the other aspect which I would like to dwell upon. The examination has to be with regard to the compliance of applicable clauses of the secretarial standards. Now, are we therefore supposed to comment on all the secretarial standards? To my mind, it is not that. It has to be those which are given in section 108 which are with regard to the general meeting and the board meetings. And therefore, the compliance will have to be with reference to those standards. And I suppose that seems to be the intention, because it cannot cover those standards which are not notified by the government. Those standards are going to be notified, and therefore their compliance will have to be done. My apologies. Now, basic issue which I have been assigned duty is the auditing principles with regard to the secretarial audit. And that is something which I am supposed to talk about. I'm sure the Institute is going to lay down a sort of complete framework for the purpose of the issuance of the secretarial audit report. And they will cover those principles which are required to be followed for the purpose of conduct of the secretarial audit. And therefore, I am only going to give you the basic principles, the main principles which are relevant for the purpose of the secretarial audit, which would be relevant. Because if we go into the secretarial auditing standards, there are a large number of standards which cover almost every aspect of the financial records. And I don't think those would be relevant as far as the secretarial audit is concerned. And therefore, I am only suggesting few principles which must be followed for the purpose of your secretarial audit, which I suppose should carry you through for the purpose of compliance. Now, to my mind, all these standards which I have just tried to put down here, or the principles which I have tried to put down, are almost same which we as chartered accountants do follow for the purpose of audit, apart from certain other requirements which are there for the purpose of being compliant with. Now, before you start with the audit, secretarial audit, the first thing which you must have is an engagement letter. The engagement letter must give what is the scope of work which you are supposed to carry out. What is the responsibility of the manager with regard to those accounts which Pawan just now stated, that the records have to be maintained by the management, not by the auditor, and therefore the responsibility of the management in that regard has to be very clearly specified in that engagement letter so as to be free from any doubt. What is the timing which is expected of you, or what is the timing which you expect to take for the purpose of completion of the work? What are the pre-arrangements? And what are the limitations of your audit? Because your purpose is, your job is to verify and check. And there is a limitation with regard to, it is not an investigative part which you are doing. Therefore, that limitation with regard to the aspect of verification only has to be very clearly specified in the engagement letter. It's advisable to have two copies thereof. One may be retained by the client, the other confirmed copy to be obtained by you for your records. Now, the second principle which must be in existence for any professional work is the integrity, objectivity and independence This is an ethical requirement which I suppose is applicable to all the professional assignments. The auditor is expected to be honest, sincere in his approach to the professional work, must be fair, and not allow any prejudice or bias to override the objectivity with which he is supposed to perform his work. Must have an impartial attitude and be free from an interest which might be regarded as being in conflict with the integrity and objectivity. Now you would kindly appreciate that as far as the statutory auditor is concerned, there are a number of things which have been specified, and this is what should not be in existence for appointing a statutory auditor. There is nothing of that type as far as the company is concerned to the secretarial audit. But I would recommend, and I would suggest, please follow those principles whereby the interest with regard to your appointment does not have any conflict with the work which you are performing. Confidentiality, the documents which you have gone through during the course of examination or the information which you have acquired in the course of the work should not be disclosed to anyone until unless it is so required by law under the, or as a professional duty it is required that it has to be done. Like sometimes the tax authorities or custom authorities or court of law may have summons with regard to the disclosure of such information, which you will not be able to say that you can't disclose. It has to be done. Now, if you are doing work for others, on behalf of you, the work is being done by others, then the supervision and review of that work is a very important aspect. You must obtain a reasonable assurance that the work performed by such engagement team is adequate for the purpose of giving you a report, which is to be given under the provisions of the Companies Act 2007. This is a most important aspect of the audit, any audit for that matter, and that is planning. You must plan your work so as to enable an effective audit to be carried out efficiently, timely. The plan has to be based on the knowledge of the telephone is not available to any reason. Sorry for inconvenience again. Now, plans should be made to cover amongst other things the following. Degree of reliance to be placed on the internal controls if there are any. As Mr. Aman Vijay was saying, that in case of GAIL there are 23 compliances, 23,000 compliances. Now to have a substantive check of all 23,000 is going to be very tough for you. Anybody will have difficulty. You can't, do that work even if you spend a period of 3 months on that. Because the checking of those compliances would require a lot of time. So therefore some sort of internal control and the framework within which you can find out that yes, the work is being carried out in accordance with the procedures laid down has to be very much in operation in any company. And that should be something which will allow you to make out what are the substantive tests which you have to carry out and what are the test checks which you have to carry out. Then the programming nature, timing and extent of what is procedures to be adopted. This also is in line with, sync with the first one. There has to be an audit program which must also state very clearly what are the jobs which are required to be verified, who is going to attend to that, your staff, who is the staff, who is qualified, not qualified, what type of background he should have so as to verify those documents. It's a sort of checklist of the requirements which you have to carry out. You can also have a checklist along with it for the compliance of the secretarial standards, which clauses you are supposed to state have been complied with your report. The plan can be devised, amended according to the requirements of the job, because it cannot have a static aspect, because it is always something which you may have to change as and when the requirement arises. This is another important principle which has to be observed, and obtaining of the audit evidence. Now, you must have and must obtain the evidence that this is the work which you carried out and what manner it has been carried out. Sufficient appropriate audit evidence to the compliance and substantive procedures to enable him to draw a reasonable conclusion therefrom on which to base his opinion on the information to be given in the report. As I stated earlier, that the management is responsible for maintaining the scheduled records and other connected books and papers on which the auditor is required to give his report. So you have to reasonably ensure that the systems in operation are adequate and information which is required to be recorded has in fact been recorded. Internal controls, if any, in this regard would help an auditor normally to contribute to such an assurance. In case the internal controls are sufficiently in place, you may reduce the substantive procedures, as I said earlier. Now, this is again an important aspect that you must obtain a sufficient evidence that all that which is required to be complied has been complied with. Now, for that, you will have to have some sort of record-based evidence, so that tomorrow, anywhere if you are questioned, you are able to produce those records. And it may be very essential for the purposes of your peer review aspect, because this audit evidence and documentation, which I am just going to take up in the next principle, is the most important requirement of any audit. This is documentation. You should prepare audit documentation that is sufficient to enable an auditor with no previous connection. You may not have any connection with the company. Earlier, you may not have even looked up the books of the company. And therefore, to understand the timing, nature, and extent of audit procedures which have to be adopted, you will have to document them so that tomorrow you can show to the peer reviewer that this is how you documented, this is how you conducted the audit. Such documentation has to be prepared on timely basis, because this is going to be a very important sort of evidence for the purpose of your conduct of the audit, which peer review is going to see. In fact, in case of all peer reviews, the basic examination is done of the files which contain the documents and the evidence with regard to the conduct of the audit. So therefore, in such cases where and I'm sure, as I understand that the peer review aspect has also been taken up by the Institute of Regulatory, this is going to be a very important aspect in the peer review. And therefore, the documentation, obtaining of audit evidence, and planning. These three would give you a sort of satisfaction, give a satisfaction to the peer reviewer that yes, the work has been carried out in accordance with the requirements of the Institute's guidelines, Institute's standards, and of course the guidance notes. This is something which the auditor has to perform. See that there is what are the areas where the risk of any false or any document which is actually not at all according to the law has been shown to you. Now those risk areas have to be assessed on the basis of the expertise obtained during the course of his experience as a practicing company secretary or a practicing chartered accountant or a cost accountant, because the risk assessment with regard to the misstatement of any of the papers which are produced to you for verification is something which again will have to be done at the very beginning of verification of a particular area. That will enable you to again, as I said earlier, take up the substantive or test checks with regard to a large number of documents or large number of compliances there in case of a very large company. So this risk assessment is a very important element and principle which has to be followed for the purpose of making the sampling of any data to be verified or any record to be verified. Now this is one of the areas where you have to have the skill and competence for the purpose of preparation of your report. Those people who have the sufficient experience, training, they should be left in the preparation of the report, and such specialized skills and competence would be acquired through a combination of general education, technical expertise, obtained through study and common qualifying examination with time by the Institute for this purpose. This is another aspect which must be also followed for the purpose of conduct of an audit. Any cases which are pending with regard to various laws which you are supposed to look into and they have to be complied with, you must have a confirmation of a legal from the legal counsel what is the stage of those, so that the litigation in respect thereof, any part which you are supposed to, comment in your report is taken care of. This will ensure that you have reviewed those aspects which were required to be reported, why they have not been reported. This again comes in the category of a documentation for which you have to maintain complete record. A representation letter is the last thing which an auditor must obtain with regard to the compliance procedures and deviations, if any, noted by the management. Also, the representation in writing for any instance of fraud against the company, because fraud reporting is now covered for the purpose of your report also. So this aspect also in the form of a representation letter is essential. I may add here that representation letter does not absolve you from your responsibility. Representation letter is only in confirmation of your having verified on the basis of the examination of the record, and then getting a confirmation that whatever it has been produced to you, you have verified on that basis. So this is only confirmation of something which is there on record. Otherwise, it does not absolve you from the responsibility. A representation letter is only a confirmatory procedure, as the confirmatory procedure with regard to the legal counsel. Now, the most difficult thing which I was assigned to speak on is the fraud. Unfortunately, there is nothing as far as the literature is concerned on this aspect. So I've tried to make out something which is in sync with this section. And I hope it will generate enough discussion here so that it's possible to come to a conclusion how and in what manner the reporting is to be done. Because there are so many issues which I'm going to raise. It may be something which may be food for thought, or for that matter, something which we can discuss here if you so desire. Now coming to the fraud reporting, I take you to this relevant section, which is section 143, which deals with the appointment of auditors. Subsection 12 requires the reporting with regard to the fraud, and it reads, notwithstanding anything contained in this section, if an auditor of a company, now this includes because notice maintenance applies, this section applies to the cost auditor as well as company secretary or secretarial audit. In the course of the performance of his duties as auditor, has reason to believe that an offence involving fraud is being or has been committed against the company by officers or employees of the company, he shall immediately report the matter to the central government within such time and such manner as is prescribed. Now kindly note few things in this. The requirement is with regard to the reporting of fraud which comes to his notice in the course of performance of his duties and has reason to believe that an offence involving fraud being or has been committed against the company by officers or employees of the company. Now this does not have any relevance to any person, etc. But if you go to the definition of the fraud, which I just now bring to your mind within a few minutes, there the definition is so wide that it covers almost everything on the earth. Of course, this section is likely to be amended in view of the Amendment Act which is placed before the Parliament, which is yet to be approved or which is yet to be passed. In this, the only aspect which has been covered is with regard to the materiality. That means if it is a particular sum which is beyond the figure specified in the rules, it will go to the central government, otherwise it will go to the board or the audit committee as the case may be. And where it goes to the audit committee or board, the board report will disclose all that thing. Now, as I said, 143(12) deals with the offences involving fraud, whether committed or being committed against the company by officers or employee of the company. But we go to the definition of the fraud, which is in section 447, explanation 1. And you will find that fraud in relation to affairs of a company or any body corporation. Now it covers both. Includes any act, omission, concealment of any fact or abuse of position committed by any person or any other person. So there are two distinct words which are used. Any person, any other person, with the connivance in any manner, with intent to deceive, to gain undue advantage from, or to injure the interests of the company or its shareholders or its creditors or any other person, whether or not there is any wrongful gain or wrongful loss. Wrongful gain or wrongful loss also has been defined. What does it mean? Now, what is meant by any person in the first instance, any other person in the first in the paragraph dealing with the report or dealing with the definition is not at all by any chance indicative anywhere either in rules or for that matter the requirements of the section as prescribed in the rule. Therefore, as far as this part is concerned, because if you go to the section, subsection 12, there the fraud is during the course of your working, that you come to, you have a reason to believe that there is a fraud which is being committed by the director, by officers or the employees. That has to be reported. But if I substitute the fraud definition there, then it happens that if it has been committed by any person or any other person, that also gets covered because of the fact that the fraud definition is so wide. And to my mind, there is some sort of disconnect which is not at all possible to be drawn conclusion from these words. For me, I feel that any person which is used here has to be someone who is connected with the company, and any other person should be that who is not connected with the company. So therefore, that can be the distinction. Otherwise, these two words have the same sort of definition if you go to the dictionary. Any other person, any person. If we try to take a help from section 185 of the Companies Act, where the loans are to be, they have been prohibited, there the words are any other person in whom the director has any interest. You can't advance loan to him. So that definition does not remain sort of applicable to this particular part. Therefore, this definition which is there with regard to the fraud, to me it covers the committing of the fraud by any other person, that means who is not connected with the company, and abuse of position which is there is by a person who is connected with the company or a person who is not connected with the company. So there are two aspects which have to be therefore distinctly to be looked into for the purpose of this definition of fraud. I will just summarize this in a manner that you may understand. It must be in relation to the affairs of the company or any body corporation. Includes any acts, omission, concealment of any fact or abuse of position. Must be committed by any person or any other person with the connivance in any manner. It must be with the intent to deceive, to gain undue advantage or to injure the interest of the company or its shareholders or its creditors or any other person. So if you have a case where the deception to gain undue advantage or to injure the interest of any other person is also existent in a particular case, it will come within the category of fraud. And it also says that there may not be any wrongful gain or wrongful loss, for the purpose of this definition. This is again another interpretation which I have placed, that if such offence are, because of the fact that it says relation to the affairs of the company, therefore any other person, if the fraud is there, it must be in relation to the affairs of the company. Because if it is not in relation to the affairs of the company, it will not have any direct effect for the purpose of this definition. There is a punitive action for non-reporting, which of course involves a fine which may not be less than 1 lakh and the extent to 25 lakhs. Then 448 and 449 deal with certain requirements that if there is any wrong certification, wrong statement, etc., those will be covered for the purpose of fine. Now, I have tried to analyze what will be covered under the Companies Act for the purpose of treatment of fraud, which would be 447. What are the sections which get attracted, or on account of which the fraud aspect will be, evident or will require to be looked into. And those are furnishing false information or suppressing material facts in documents or declaration filed for incorporation of company, Section 7(5), misstatement in prospectus, Section 34, fraudulent inducement to invest, making false promises, forecasts or statements, Section 36(1), presentation for acquisition of securities or making multiple applications for acquiring securities, Section 38, issue of duplicate shares which is intent to defraud, Section 46(5), transfer of shares which is intent to defraud, 56(7), reduction of capital, concealing name of creditor or misrepresenting amount or nature of debt, Section 66, subsection 10, auditors acting in fraudulent manner or in fraud by or relation to companies, that is 140, subsection 5, carrying on business of the company for a fraudulent unlawful purpose, 2064, business of the company carried on with the intent to defraud creditors, members or any other person, otherwise for fraudulent or unlawful purposes, furnishing false statement, mutilation, destruction of documents, falsification of documents during course of inspection, inquiry, investigation, Section 229, fraudulent application for removal of name. In the course of winding up, if it appears that business of the company has been carried with the intent to defraud creditors or other persons or for any fraudulent purposes, 391, and false statement in any return statement, prospectus or other documents for purposes of excluding the same. This is Section 448. Now, therefore, what is required is that all these areas which are there, if any of the areas falls within the ambit of your audit, you may have to be careful, look into it, and if the area is such where you have a reason to believe that there is a fraud which has been committed or being committed, the reporting issue will come up. Now, there is another aspect which is important, and I am giving these special codes and then the SI report because now the legal status has been given to it under the relevant section 211. I am not commenting on it, but I wanted to draw your attention to the rule which is relevant for the purpose of reporting the fraud. Now the rule and the section are again contradictory. Can you see? It says for the purpose of subsection 12 of section 143, says the auditor has sufficient reason. Now the section uses the word reason to believe. And reason to believe is a defined term, I won't say defined term, but a term which has been, legally almost settled. Because the same terminology is used in Income Tax Act for the purpose of reopening the assessments. There, the reasonable reason to believe has been legally stated that it means an apparent reason should be proximate reason for the purposes of coming to a conclusion that yes, the escapement of income is there. Because this word is not defined in this act, taking the same interpretation, because the courts have always said that if a particular terminology is not defined in a particular act, if the other act helps to derive some sort of idea with regard to that definition or with regard to that terminology, you may use that. So, taking the benefit of that, it only talks about the apparent reasons. Apparently, the AO must be of the opinion that yes, there is an escape. Here also, applying the same definition, the auditor must be apparently of that, or prima facie of that opinion. Rules go to the extent of saying sufficient reason. Now, therefore, sufficient reason means there must be an evidence more than the other. Now, this is a contradiction for which as yet nothing has been done. This is again an issue which may have to be dealt with the authorities as so as to bring it in line with the. And I am sure, when the newly amended subsection 12 comes, the rules would also be changed. At that point of time, maybe they take care of this. Now here, another issue which is important. ADT 4 is the form which has been prescribed for the purpose of reporting. The requirements are address of the office or location where the suspected offence is believed to have been or is being committed. Full details of the suspected offence. Now here the word suspected is being used, whereas there is a sufficient reason. Here the word is suspected offence. Involving fraud, attach documents in support. Particulars of the officers or employee who are suspected to be involved. Name, designation, if director is DL number. Now, this requirement, basis on which fraud is suspected. Estimated amount involved in the suspected fraud. I do not know how do you come to a case where it is only a reason to believe. You come to a conclusion of the basis for coming, you have only approximate reason or for that matter, apparent reason or for that matter, not any evidence. You are going on the basis of some apparent fault in the papers which you have come to know and you want to bring it to the notice of the management or the ministry as maybe required. But my worry is that the way this form has been used, again, puts a member, whether it is a chartered accountant, a company secretary or a cost accountant, because it is not at all in line with what is the requirement of the section. The addition of the word sufficient in the rule mandates an auditor to have concrete evidence position before reporting on fraud. Contrary to this, Act requires an auditor to exercise his judgment on such reporting. As I said earlier, that is the basis on which fraud is suspected, estimated amount. Without sufficient reason, you cannot have the basis as well as the amount. I do not know whether the rules, these aspects and rules have been brought to the notice of the authorities. In fact, the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India has issued a guidance note. On the basis of all that, I wish the guidance note had been delayed and all these aspects also would have been put before the authorities so as to bring it in line and sync with the requirements of the section. This is all, sir. Thank you so much for giving me a